Is law of attraction real? And if so, where does God fit into the equation? This is a really juicy topic, so let's dive in. Law of attraction is a really popular concept that has been circling around for some years now, so I thought it was a really important topic to bring forward. But first, I just want to state that everything that I look at and give to you for consideration is through one lens and one lens only, and that is it true? Heads up, today's video is going to be a little bit longer because there is so much to share and I really want to cover all of the bases for you. So first, let's ask the question, is law of attraction true? Well, yes and no. You may be wondering, how can something be both a yes and a no? And it's actually pretty simple. In this world, there are levels of awareness for human beings. For example, if we look only at my personal experience, I might experience something as true. Yet, when I expand my awareness of what is true in reality, not just my experience, we locate a bigger truth versus a personal belief. A real-life example of this is found in the phenomenological truth that the sun rises. Does the sun rise in the morning? Yes, of course. But does it rise in reality? No, actually it does not. The sun has a fixed juxtaposition and the earth is what is actually moving. So that's an example of how we can locate an experiential truth versus an actual truth. And fun fact, believe it or not, we're going to see this experiential truth variation of the yes-no paradox when we begin to look at the truth behind free will, which is going to be an entirely different video, and I'm excited to get that one going, but that's another topic for another day. And I beg the question, why settle for less? Do we want to see only an experiential aspect of truth, or do we really want to seek the truth that is actually true in reality? For me, I'm only spiritually satisfied with the truth. Okay, so philosophy moment aside, let's dive into the law of attraction and God. So going back to the question, is law of attraction true? And I said yes and no. So let's start with the yes. Yes, because of the phenomenological factor, when our consciousness has a direct experience repeatedly, we could say that that phenomenon is true through that lens. So starting from there, let's examine this further. But before we go on, let's first get on the same page about what law of attraction actually is. I want to note that I'm looking at law of attraction as the underlying principle that's reflected in the title. This is not to be confused with the law of attraction teachings that are floating around out there. Those are two separate things. The underlying principle is what we put out is what we get back. This principle is indeed ancient and was formed into the title Law of Attraction at a later date. So that's the principle. The teachings, which are often different from the principle, and they vary greatly, can be summed up kind of like this. This is the most popular representation of law of attraction in the teachings. So visualize a car and you can attract the car. Visualize good health and you're going to attract good health. Basically, focus on what you want, fill yourself with positive vibes, and you will create your reality. So that's a differentiator between the underlying principle and the teachings that are going around. And to me, examining anything except the principle is a waste of time. There can be 1,000 illusions, but one root system. So let's look at the root system. Also, practically speaking, metaphors aside, principles reflect truth and are closer to the truth than the extrapolations that surround them. Okay. So going back to the yes, the principle of what we put out is what comes back is a valid principle, is reflected in the Bible as far back as Job. The principle can be summed up as what we sow, so shall we reap. And we're going to be looking at some biblical examples of this core principle. Okay, let's dive into these. Job 4:8 says, according to what I have seen, those who plow wrongdoing and those who sow trouble harvest it. Hosea 10:13 says, you have plowed wickedness, you have harvested injustice. And in New Testament examples, those were even more prevalent. Galatians 6:7-9 says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a person sows, this he also will reap. For the one who sows of his own flesh will reap destruction from the flesh, but the one who sows of the Spirit will reap eternal life from the Spirit. And 2 Corinthians 9:6 says, now I say this, the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. The one who sows generously will also reap generously. And then we have James 3:18, and the fruit of the righteous is sown in peace by those who make peace. Now, I want to point out, I'm not saying all of these verses directly correlate, but they're reflecting the principle. What I am saying is that this principle does show up and is reflected in biblical teachings. And the Bible takes it one step further. It even talks about how in judgment, we will be judged as we judge. So here's where the greater no kicks in. So I said yes and no. Let's explore no further. If we stop at the principle only, as the New Age philosophy has been doing, we're missing an essential underpinning of a much greater truth. And that truth is God's role in our lives. So the question becomes, what role does God play in the law of attraction, if any? And let's go back to recalling the experiences, right? I'm suggesting that an experience isn't always the best representation of the reality of truth. For example, I'm terrified of flying, and before going on an overseas trip, I swore my intuition was telling me the plane was going to crash and I didn't want to go, and I was fully in terror. And I got on the plane, and the plane ride was completely fine. Nothing was wrong. It was a made-up story in my head. The experience did not match reality. I've known a lot of people that have had the law of attraction work well for them. And it does make sense because they're tapping into positive feelings, which represent love, which represent spirit. So it makes sense that they would experience it as being true. What I'm suggesting, it is not the truth of reality. It's not the only thing that is going on. And the limited teaching is sadly being taught in many, many circles. And I say sadly because any teaching that leaves out the God who created the principle itself, to me, is so limiting. We're actually limiting ourselves if we think that that is it. And here's why. I have found that law of attraction teachings alone, without God, are limited because they exclude three massively important aspects of human reality. The first one is intelligent design. We are God authored. We did not author ourselves. And it stands to reason that when we don't have God in our lives, we sometimes try to play author. The second thing excluded is God's conscious role in our life. I've seen a lot of people miss this one because they haven't yet developed that personal relationship with God, and therefore accidentally project their assumptions onto God, or they allow their assumptions to form their world view. So let's again look back to truth to provide an answer. So A, God is spirit, right? I think we can all agree on that. But consider, spirit is not matter, spirit is energy by default. Spirit is energy. I don't know what else it could be. Yet, God is not just energy alone. So in order to create a universe, create life, and create intelligence, God has to be conscious. So we can conclude that God is conscious energy, not just energy like Taoism teaches. And God can play a very key role in our wholeness, our integration, our prosperity, which leads me to the last exclusion, exclusion number 3. The current New Age teachings leave out God's role by placing the burden wrongly upon the human being. And here are some key things to consider about wrongful burden. Personally, when I was an atheist, I looked to the law of attraction kind of like a savior. I was really drawn to the idea that I could create the perfect life. I could create my own health, my own wealth, my wisdom. It all sounded so bubbly and amazing. So as a deep thinker, I justified the law of attraction by studying quantum physics, which was really fun. I really enjoyed that whole process. But I left God out of the equation. And then, not to mention all the days that I was hurting, I was crying, and I was going through my own, trying to navigate the world in my own healing from some traumas. And from my perspective, according to the New Age teachings and quantum physics, if you want to throw that in there, I thought, oh no, I can't be stuck in the negative. I'm going to attract bad things. And guilt and fear would just pile up within me. And so the law of attraction teaches, they basically say, oh, that's okay. Just up level your vibration by picking one better feeling than the one you were in, and then you'll be good to go. So I began shoving the negative feelings down, which is commonly known in the psychology world as downright toxic to the human psyche. And looking back, I see how toxic that was for my spirit as well. My sorrows, my grief, my fear, my inner anguish became a cross to carry, and I ignored my need for healing because it was considered too negative. So my beef with the New Age version of law of attraction, how it's being taught, and I'm not saying everybody teaches it this way, but this is a prevalent teaching that I've come across, I think can be summed up like this. On those days when I'm hurting the most is when I need the law of attraction to work best, but that's not what we're taught. Instead, we can end up feeling guilty and wrong for having negative emotions instead of turning to God for help. And so here's where it gets interesting and how I began to discover that the law of attraction was not the truth and there was a greater truth. I shared in another video how God woke me up. I did experience an actual miracle in my life, and I won't get into that. It's a whole story. But on that day, when God found me, I was anything but happy. I was, according to the law of attraction teachings, at the lowest vibrational feeling that we can have as a human being, and that was apathy. Yet God found me in a moment of deep despair. When I realized that my experience defied probability more than 3 times, I realized that God is not just an energy. God is conscious and responsive, and my state of being is not a factor for God's love. My state of being is not a factor for God's love. And what a relief. I can feel angry. I can feel apathetic. I can feel sad. I can feel frustrated. And God can still send me prosperity, send me hope, and send me help. All right, so let's take a look at what the Bible has to say. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares about you. Psalm 55:22, cast your burden upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. And Philippians 4:6-7, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and pleading with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. As you can see, it's more about a relationship and also allowing God to step in when we're hurting and provide the healing and the help and the hope. So, in summary, there you have it. Turns out the principle of reaping and sowing is indeed an aspect that we can experience because it is based on God's law. And consider, people make rules, but God creates laws and principles. And those principles govern this world. So align with those and you will see that there's aspects of life that defy probability, which is exactly what this channel was created for. Furthermore, the principles of sowing and reaping and faith are biblical and stand up against the ages. But if we believe in the law of attraction alone, we'll be living literally through probability. And the bigger truth is that when we walk with God, we can surpass that and we can step more into possibility through a support and a love and a provider who surpasses all understanding. So I hope this is helpful. And if you have been practicing a law of attraction without including God. I invite you to invite God into that and see what happens, and hand over your fears, your desires, hand it all over. Wishing you all the best and some coaching questions to consider. Who am I with God? Who am I without God? What's possible when I align with God's principles? And what's the result when I don't, when I rebel against God's principles? Until next time, bye.